This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. We begin today's show with K-State Assistant Professor in the Division of Biology, Sonny Lee. He recently received the Career Award that will support his study of the interaction between plants and their soil microbiomes. Susan Metzger, Associate Director for Agriculture and Extension at K-State and the Director of KCARE, continues today's show to review the recent House Bills 2302 and 2279. She shares how they will impact Kansas. Today's show finishes with K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk. He says even in the summer, Kansas dairy producers are making progress in reducing somatic cell counts in the herd. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and on this Tuesday, we begin our show with talking to an assistant professor in the Division of Biology as he is studying the interaction between plants and their soil microbiomes in the face of environmental change. That assistant professor is Sonny Lee. Sonny, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
It's my pleasure.
Now, some of the funding from this research has come from a recent award that Sonny won. That award is called the National Science Foundation Faculty Early Career Development Program Award, also known as the Career Award. And in this award, he was awarded over $900,000. So, Sonny, how do you plan to continue your research after receiving this Career Award?
The Career Award is special in a way that it does not just entails research. There's three parts of it: research, education, and outreach. So in terms of research, my work is to find out the interaction or how does plant interact with their own microbes, and does this interaction help them to become better adapt in the changing climate conditions. And this research links through education and outreach. And in outreach, all these results will not only be gathered by myself, but also be gathered by some students in some of my classes. In return, these students will then be able to take the results, interpret them, and talk about their results in our class and understand how science works. The other more important part of this Career Award is about outreach. And in terms of outreach, we are working with a couple of citizen science program from Colorado all the way to North Carolina, and they are helping us to collect samples of plants throughout these regions, at the same time also training their trainees how to interpret and identify the plants of interest.
So a lot of things going into you receiving the Career Award, which congratulations on doing that. But is this research something that has already started?
A small part of the research has already started. We have a bit of idea what microbes is interacting with the plant when the plant is under drought stress. There's still a huge part of the work that has to be done. We already have classes ongoing. We have done this in at least 1 to 2 semesters. We test out with some of the students. But the big chunk of the citizen science program is right now undergoing this summer and the next few years.
A part of your research says, talking about the environmental change, and right now I think a big part, especially drought, which is something that a lot of Kansas and the Midwest is experiencing. So how do you think your research and your knowledge, or how do you hope it impacts and shares knowledge with more people?
So I think in terms of looking at plants, whether it's agriculture-based or conservation-based, or how it impact farmers in the future, is that how does plants interact with their microbes? And for a long time, we started to understand that, microbes is a big part of plants. And it helps the plants in terms of becoming more resilient or can fight off pathogens. And now we started to understand that maybe the plants and the microbes can work together and they can become more resistant to the drought conditions. Now the question is, what microbes? And I think that's where our research comes in to start identifying these microbes. And we started off with just very simple to understand who are these microbes. And then we go deeper to understand what are these microbes doing. And then right now we are going in even more further to say if these microbes are doing certain jobs that the plants needs, how does the plants communicate with these microbes and say, what are you giving me? And I think this whole thing just come round into a big circle.
So kind of trying to understand the language of the plants and how everything interacts.
Yes, that's correct.
You mentioned it before that students are going to be helping you as well as other citizen scientists. What knowledge does that give to students as they may want to further their career in biology?
In terms of students, they actually got a very well-rounded education or knowledge from this class. They started off understanding the plant physiology, how does plants react during good conditions and during stressful conditions, to understanding what are the microbes that are present around the plants, whether is it on their leaves or whether is it on their roots or around the soil around it. Then they start to understand how to collect samples from the field, how to process these samples, and how to extract or how to get bacteria or get microbes from these plants in the lab conditions. And finally, they understand about data, which is one of the most important thing. After they get the bacteria or microbes from this soil or the roots or the leaves of the plants, how do they interpret this data into meaningful results and meaningful messages for the public, at least for their class in this sense.
So they're gaining knowledge about how to do the process while also helping you gain knowledge to share with others about the interaction between plants and their soil.
Yes. So this is, I guess I call it a win-win situation. They are helping me, and in helping me, I can get my samples even broader, and even there I can even process more samples within a shorter period of time. And their win, in terms of the students' wins, is they learned knowledge and skills throughout the process, from collection of samples all the way to interpretation of data.
And you mentioned you're having collections all the way from Colorado to North Carolina. So you're a K-State assistant professor, but really this is spanning more than just Kansas.
Yes, I cannot work alone, and I understand that. So I work with a lot of great collaborators and citizen science and organizations. We started off collecting samples just in Kansas because Kansas has a really, really nice precipitation gradient from very wet on the east side of Kansas to very dry on the west side of Kansas. And once we got that data, we start to ask ourselves and say, does this pattern that we see actually translate through the U.S.? And so we started talking to other organizations, citizen science programs, and we want to expand this all the way to North Carolina, north to Nebraska, and south to Texas.
A wide span of things. And Sonny, you mentioned that this could really have an impact for farmers and ranchers to better understand changing climate conditions. Is that something that you're hoping to further understand, or are you starting to get a grasp?
I think at this stage I'm starting to get a grasp, starting to hope to gain even more insight, because the plant that we are studying is big blue stem. And big blue stem has lots of uses, from conservation to biofuel to feed for animals. And what we are studying will not just apply to big blue stem, but the methods that we are using could now then be applied to other plants, other grasses as well. Plants cannot move, which means that if the climate change, they have to stay there. And maybe, just maybe, what we can provide can give us a clue. If they cannot move with the drought conditions or changing in the climate, can we help them to be better?
Something that very important for Kansas producers of how do we have what we have and hopefully make it better.
Yes, definitely.
So you said you're studying this just on big bluestem, but hopefully there's application moving forward for other grasses and plants.
Yes, what we are studying right now is for big bluestem. There are two avenues of it. One is the methods of study. Hopefully the methods of study will be able to apply to other important plants or crops in the future. And two, what we are doing right now is we are identifying the set of microbes that may be talking or interacting with the plants. Could these sets of microbes be able to then apply to other plants or other crops? This is still too early to say, but this is something that is in our view as we proceed on with our research.
Sonny, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today and talking about some of the research you're working on.
Thank you.
That was Kansas State University Assistant Professor in the Division of Biology, Sonny Lee. He was recently awarded the Career Award and also received over $900,000 to put towards his study of the interaction between plants and their soil microbiomes in the face of environmental change. This award supports the integration of education with research, so students have helped him complete this study, as well as citizen scientists. Sonny's research will hopefully help farmers and ranchers better understand climatic conditions as they continue to change. If you are about to your destination and don't want to miss out on the rest of Agriculture Today, you can find it on agtoday.net or on your favorite streaming platforms. When we come back after the break, we'll be joined with Susan Metzger, and then following that, we'll have Mike Brouk with your weekly Milk Lines update. That and more is coming up ahead today on Agriculture Today. Welcome back to Agriculture Today. At the end of April, Governor Kelly signed a bipartisan bill to invest a record $35 million to protect water resources. And in to talk about that today, we have Associate Director for Agriculture and Extension at K-State and the Director of KCARE, Susan Metzger. Susan, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Shelby, thanks for having me to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is water.
Susan, to get started, could you just touch on what is this bill?
Absolutely. So we're really excited that the governor approved and signed a bipartisan piece of legislation that provides a significant amount of funding directed towards addressing our state's highest priority water resource challenges. More than 10 years ago, a group got together and really identified what those priority needs would be and the price tag that it would take to actually address them. And this bill really comes quite close to addressing those the financial challenges that were outlined in that task force summary.
And you said water resources. What are the water resources that this bill is touching on?
It's truly statewide, but Kansas is really quite unique that our water resource challenges are diverse. So in western Kansas, we're groundwater sourced, and that groundwater source, the Ogallala High Plains Aquifer, is a limited resource. So we know that we need to conserve that resource going into the future. And in eastern Kansas, we're surface water driven. So a system of streams and reservoirs that provide the water resources for our communities and industries. And so in eastern Kansas, conservation is important, but also addressing water quality concerns.
You mentioned going into the future, and this is the first time since 2008 the state water plan has been fully funded. Is that exciting news for Kansas?
It is exciting news. Everybody should be excited about that. So when we talk about our challenges going into the future, they are significant. We know that if we were to do nothing, if we wouldn't have these resources available to us, that 50 years into the future, the Ogallala High Plains Aquifer in Kansas would be 70% depleted, and our reservoirs in eastern Kansas would be 40% full of sediment impacting our storage. And so these dollars help us tackle those challenges.
A lot of different things happening with this bill and hopefully supporting a lot of water resources in Kansas like it's meant to do. And it says to invest a record $35 million. But if you start going through it, actually it starts to be a little bit more than that, especially for this first year. Why is that?
You're right, Shelby. So if you were to add up all the parts and pieces, it's closer to $80 million in the first year of it. It's spread out over a 5-year time period, a commitment with this bill. But in the beginning, there's also $52 million that's dedicated to the retirement or payoff of debt in our federal reservoirs in northeast Kansas. And that should be important to all of the citizens in Kansas, because by paying off that debt, the citizens of Kansas have more of a say of the use of that storage for the benefit of the citizens of Kansas, especially along the Kansas River corridor. But then in future years, above that $52 million is a commitment of $35 million that comes from the state general fund that can be used for a number of water-related projects. So of that $35 million, $5 million of that's dedicated to what they're calling a water technical assistance fund, which can go to municipalities and other political units, such as a watershed district, to work on high priority projects. And then another $12 million of that $35 million goes to the water project grant funds, which can be used for construction and upgrades to what they consider water infrastructure projects. And then you can, if you're counting up all the money of that $17 million, the balance then of the $35 million goes to other high priority water resource projects.
A lot of money, a lot of places for it to be allocated. And so hopefully a lot to help with Kansas, and obviously at Kansas State University, we love Kansas. And so how does this bill impact K-State teaching, research, and extension?
Really, K-State is the university for Kansans. And so this funding opportunity is really the opportunity for K-State to be the resource to those municipalities and the political units and the individuals that might be thinking about those water infrastructure projects or any of the other priority projects that would put the $35 million on the ground throughout the state. So we know we've been backing that up with the research that we have in place, but also training the next generation workforce to tackle all those problems. We're going to need the brightest minds in Kansas coming through K-State and learning about the engineering side of it, the planning side, the political side, all of the elements of tackling those water resource projects so that we're graduating the students that have that expertise. And then the extension part of it. So we often say it's not just our enrollment at K-State University on our campuses, but that we really serve all of the citizens of Kansas. And so K-State's going to have an integral role in putting those dollars on the ground for the benefit of our citizens.
So hopefully helping teach the students to know more about this so that they can support Kansas moving forward.
Whether a student has an interest in political science or agronomy, there's an exciting future for a career in water, and K-State's a great place to come and learn about those potential opportunities.
Now, this House Bill 2302 has not been into effect quite yet. It goes into effect July 1. Are there any big changes you're expecting to see, or will it just be another day?
It definitely changes. So for everybody, this is a learning opportunity of how to effectively administer that volume of funds. And so the legislation requires that the Kansas Water Office, which is the state's government agency for the planning of water resources in the state, and then their advisory council or the Water Authority, it's up to the Water Office and the Water Authority to really outline the process for how to put those funds on the ground. What does that Water Technical Assistance Fund, what does the Water Project Grant Fund process look like? And then also, how are you going to prioritize the remaining of the $35 million? So a lot of heavy lifting between now and July 1st so that all the partners together can learn about how that funding process is going to be put into place so we can hit the ground running, because we have 5 years to get the work done under this funding scenario. And I think the real opportunity is to show back to the governor and the legislature and all of the conferees who helped make this funding possible that we were ready, that we targeted to the highest priority projects and addressed some real serious resource concerns. And at the end of the 5 years, they know it's worth a similar investment going into the future.
And you've mentioned it a couple times. It's not an infinite bill. It's for 5 years and then maybe seeing what happens after that.
Absolutely. But we know that our challenge is, when I talked about if we do nothing, the 50-year scenario for the Ogallala High Plains and our reservoirs, we don't solve all those problems in 5 years. But our opportunity immediately in front of us is to do the best job spending those resources to the highest priority needs in the next 5 years.
Another House bill that Governor Kelly has recently signed in is 2279, and that talks about groundwater management districts having to submit annual reports. What does that look like for Kansas?
That other bill related specifically to our 5 groundwater management districts in the state. So those 5 groundwater management districts are over the Ogallala High Plains in the state, mostly in western Kansas, are geographically located. And so they are semi-governmental organizations that assess taxes on their water right users and landowners within their district, and then turn that back for projects that benefit the water users in the district. So this bill outlines several things for them of accountability and reporting of their finances. But the part that's significant, I think, to Kansas State University is that it requires each of those groundwater management districts to identify priority areas and to work with locals within their district to develop plans for tackling the water resource challenges, specifically groundwater declines in those priority areas. And K-State can really be a resource to those GMDs for helping to identify those priority areas and really to be working with the locals in their district to collaborate on the development of that plan. That's really the benefit and the purpose of our extension services. We have those relationships in local communities, and so it's an opportunity for K-State Extension to be partnering with these GMDs for the successful implementation of this bill.
You've mentioned what it means for K-State and Extension. What does it mean for Kansas producers?
So I think when this bill was being introduced, there were conferees who were concerned about this particular bill and the level of accountability. But now it's really an opportunity for producers to craft their future, to work directly with their GMDs. If they're in a priority area, that they have direct say into the type of programs and policies and practices that will help them achieve their priority outcomes. And many of our producers are already ahead of the game. They're thinking about the role of innovation and technology and craft choices, management practices that they're already putting in place to address a declining aquifer. And this bill just directs more attention to the opportunity to address that challenge.
Thank you so much for taking the time today to share some of your knowledge and kind of break down House Bill 2302 and 2279. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Shelby.
That was the Associate Director for Agriculture and Extension at K-State and Director of KCARE, Susan Metzger, discussing Governor Kelly's recent signing of the bipartisan bill, House Bill 2302, which invests record amount of $35 million to protect water resources. If you would like to read this Senate substitute House Bill for 2302, it will be linked in today's show notes, which, as always, can be found on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be back with more on Agriculture Today.
This is Agriculture Today. I'm Jeff Wickman. We end today's program with this week's milk lines. Even in the summer, when bacteria grows more rapidly, Kansas dairy producers are making progress in reducing somatic cell counts in the herd. K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk has more.
Today I'd like to visit with our Kansas dairy producers concerning average somatic cell counts into the milk supply here in the central milk marketing area. You know, this is really a hats off to our dairy producers. Over the last 20 or so years, our dairies here in the Midwest have really worked hard at reducing the level of somatic cell that we actually have in our raw milk that is leaving our farms. Somatic cell count is related to the prevalence of mastitis, so our dairy farms have been very, very diligent in reducing the level of mastitis that we might find in our herd. And in 2022, the average somatic cell count of milk shipped here into the central milk marketing order was only 190,000. So really, what does that mean? If we look at the federal somatic cell regulatory limit. That's 750,000 cells per mil. Many of our dairies and companies that actually buy this raw milk, because of activities they have in the export market, their requirements is that the milk be less than 400,000. So here in the Central Order, our average for 2022 was actually less than half of that. So really a hats off to everything that our producers are doing. And actually, as we look back over the last 5 years or so here in the Central Order, we have basically been either just below 200,000 average for the year or just slightly above. So our average for those 5 years would actually be under 200,000. Now, is our job finished? Well, no, there's always some things that we could do a little bit better. So as we look at average somatic cell counts by month, we do see a rise during the summer months, and that's, typical actually across our industry. When we have warmer weather, bacteria multiply at a little faster rate. During the summertime, we have heat stress, so those animals are actually searching for areas that are wet to try to help cool themselves. So we generally see a little bit of a spike. One thing that I think is very, very encouraging is that as we look at what the trends are, our summertime spikes become less and less over time. So that's, I think, really exciting for our industry, and indication that we're doing a much, much better job of managing the times of the year where we have potential for an increased somatic cell count in our herd. And we do that in a variety of ways. Part of that is the removal of animals that have contagious mastitis, or animals that might spread mastitis to a herd mate. And our herds, as we reduce our overall level of somatic cell in the herd, one of the things that we do as a control practice is we do try to identify and remove those animals through culling that are carrying contagious mastitis. The environmental thing, when we look at those types of bacteria that just simply are present mostly in the bedding, actually, or in the resting areas where the animals rest, we've just have done a much, much better job of keeping animals on nice, clean beds. That's a major way that we actually control the spread of the environmental pathogens during the summer, is just having clean resting places for our dairy animals. And keep in mind, these animals are going to be in these beds for 12 to 14 hours a day. So the exposure to pathogens in the bed, it's a major way that we actually allow pathogens to find their way inside the udder and to cause us issues with mastitis. So moving forward, do we still have some room for improvement? Yes, we do, particularly in the summer months. So again, trying to keep those resting areas very clean, and trying to control the access to wet areas so we don't have animals laying in those areas to try to cool themselves. So doing a better job with heat abatement. This is Mike Brouk with K-State Research and Extension. Again, extending a congratulations to our dairy farms for their excellent job in controlling mastitis within their herds, and just an encouragement that we still have some work to do during the summer months.
Thanks, Mike. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.